Hi, my name is Judith Razieli, and I'm going to read a story that I wrote. It's about my mother that she told me about her experiences as a little girl coming to America. She was only 7 years old when she came here, so she related all this information to me. I call it At the Gates. The frail but ruddy cheeked girl was, I might have to put my glasses on to read this. Okay. The frail but ruddy-cheeked girl was only 7 years old, yet despite her tender age, she was already burdened by the unhappy memories of hunger, cold, religious persecution, and of terror-filled days that war brings. The child clung to her mother as her round blue eyes sought out the new and bewildering sights that surrounded her. The large room where they stood was filled with people. Some were laughing while others were weeping or shouting. Some of the people just clustered together but were silent. Most were clutching onto small parcels and old woven baskets that held their few meager possessions. The girl felt very uncomfortable in this noisy and crowded room. Sounds of a foreign language buzzed in her ears. She was flushed and felt chilled. The odor of tired, unwashed bodies met her nostrils. She trembled and pressed even closer to her mother's supple and comforting body. Her mother spoke gently to her and told her not to be afraid. She reassured her that all would be well. They were waiting to be channeled through immigration procedures at a place called Ellis Island. The year was 1921. To the small girl, it seemed as if she was always waiting for something, waiting for food, waiting for a chance to sit by the old burning stove to keep warm, but above all, waiting to be with her father in America. Now the day had mercifully arrived. Her father, whom she was separated from since infancy, knew that Russia offered nothing but a harsh and bitter existence. Therefore, he came to the decision to immigrate to America, the land of opportunity, and send for his wife and daughter as quickly as possible. However, he found life to be difficult in America for a Russian Jewish immigrant who had neither trade nor profession. It took him over 6 long, lonely, and depressing years before he could afford to bring this family over to the United States. Now the time all had thirsted for had arrived. His wife and child were at the gates of America. Next, the girl heard a loud, raspy voice call out impatiently. An old man who was ahead of them in a long line was not finished. They therefore moved forward. Was now finished. The girl's mother knew how to speak and understand a spattering of English, but the child did not have any knowledge of the language. She spoke Yiddish, a language composed chiefly of German, Hebrew, and Russian, and spoken by the Jewish people throughout Eastern Europe. Seated in front of them was a heavy and balding man. He wore gold-rimmed glasses that were sliding down his prominent nose. Perspiration trickled from off his broad forehead, meandered to his pale cheeks, and then continued their journey to his thick neck, leaving him with a soaking wet collar. His white short-sleeved shirt was wrinkled and ink-stained. He had the complicated task of checking, gathering information, and clearing the new immigrants as they disembarked from their ships on their entry into the country. To the small girl, he looked stern and threatening. The top of his desk was cluttered with papers. He continued to write. Names? He asked loudly. I, Rivka, mine daughter, she named Seitel, answered the girl's mother. How did you earn a living in Russia? He probed further. I have small farm. I make cheese, sell cheese. Mine husband send me money, she replied timidly in her mangled English. The little girl heard the man repeat their names, Rivka and Seitel, with an unpleasant and unfamiliar accent. Are the stories I've heard about beautiful and free America true? Seitel pondered. America was the golden land to the girl and her mother, a country where they could now expect both peaceful and promising future. The child had heard stories from her friends that in America, gold lay in the streets just waiting to be picked up. Sadel cautiously watched the man. She noticed he made certain to fill in all the spaces on the forms. He stopped for a moment in his duties, lifted his eyes from the paperwork, and looked up at the two poorly clad immigrants standing before him. He briefly glanced at the girl's mother, but his smoky gray eyes rested on Sadel. They chose not to leave. His smoky gray eyes rested on Sadel, and they chose not to leave. He continued to stare at her. Next, he motioned for her to come closer to him. Sadel looked to her mother for an answer of what to do. Her mother, subtle, told her she had better do as the man wishes. The man reached out and placed his hand on her cheek and then on her forehead. Suddenly, he began to shout something. Before she or her mother knew what was happening, Sadel felt herself being tugged by two men who seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Quickly and without any explanation, she was pried away from her mother. "Mama, Mama!" she cried in terror. She desperately tried to get back to her mother, but the men holding her were strong and unyielding. Her mother, also being aware of what was going on, cried out in anguish for her daughter. Their cries, however, were of no consequence. Sadel tried again to free herself, but this long, uncomfortable trip on the ship, the lack of food and sleep left her unusually weak. She also felt so hot and dizzy. The man brought her to a large blue car, placed her in the back seat, and sped away. They drove her further and further from her mother, away from the nucleus in her young life. Thoughts were spinning in her head. "Perhaps it's all a terrible dream. Please let me wake up," she sobbed. The car came to an abrupt halt in front of a tall, dirty brick building. It looked old and uninviting. Large letters were etched into the stone above the entrance, but she could not read what was written. She resisted leaving the car, but after a short struggle, she found herself being carried into the building. A plump, blonde-haired woman took Sadel by the hand and led her into a small room. The shabby clothes were stripped off and efficiently placed with an open back, simple cotton nightgown. She had never seen such a garment. "Why am I in this strange place? If only someone could speak to me." A feeling of despair welled within her. "It cannot be they will harm me," she then thought. "This is America." By now her bladder was full, and there was no place in the room where she could relieve herself, and so, having no choice, she shamefully voided on the floor. She saw a bed in the room. She slowly approached it and lay down on the cool sheets. Sadel closed her tired eyes, but could not sleep. She scanned the room. It was windowless and bare, with the exception of the bed and a small table with drawers. She could see cracks running along the white painted walls. While her eyes traced the pattern in one of these cracks, the door swung open. In entered a dark-haired man and a woman. Sadel recognized the woman as the one who brought her to the barren room. The man approached Sadel, and she carefully studied him. He was not tall, but because he stood erect, he gave the appearance of being so. His hands, unlike her rough hands, were smooth and clean. His gaze was steady and concerned. She looked directly at him and saw his dark eyes radiate both warmth and compassion. Her instincts told her that she need not fear him. A feeling of trust enveloped her, and for the first time since she had been separated from her mother, she relaxed. The man wore what to her was a strange object around his neck. He gently took hold of her wrist. Next, he put part of the metal object in his ears and part of it on her chest. It felt cold to Sadel, who was now burning with fever. The woman, who was dressed in white, handed Sadel a glass of water and then two tiny round things. Sadel looked to the man, and she saw him pantomime that she should put the tablets in her mouth. Since she had never seen pills before, she chewed them. The taste was awful. She spat them out and quietly gulped down the water, and the man and woman looked at each other and quietly left the room. As soon as they left, she began to pray. Oh God, please help me to get out of here and be with my mama. I'll be a good girl and do whatever mama asks me to do. Please help me, God. When sleep finally did come to her, it was filled with disturbing dreams. She saw visions of houses in flames and of people fleeing while men on horseback chased after them. Then, Zettel, Zettel, she heard someone softly repeat her name. When she awoke, appearing before her was a bearded old man. On his head was a black skull cap. His clothes were similar to the garb worn by the rabbis for her own small village. She rubbed her eyes. Again he uttered her name. Zettel, Zettel, wake up, he spoke in Yiddish. Oh, how wonderful to hear those familiar sounds, she thought. She reached out to him. He quietly told her she was in a hospital and that she need not be afraid. But when he said the word hospital, her eyes grew wide with the look of fear. He spoke on and explained, Zettel, in America one does not go to a hospital to die, but rather to get well. He informed her that she had a highly contagious disease, measles, but that she would be healthy and strong again. Your mother is fine and has been informed of what has happened. Due to all the excitement and anxiety surrounding the journey, she did not realize that you were ill, he continued. The authorities apologized for the manner in which they took you, little one, but they did not want you to infect the others. You will have to be here until you are cured, and then you will be allowed to leave, he reassured her. She realized in the hospital, remained in the hospital for 14 days. Although the long hours were lonesome and monotonous, there were rays of delight as well. For the first time in her life, she saw and ate an orange. What a treat it was to her. The nurses made an attempt to teach her English, and they also brought games for her to play. Still, the days crept by like a snail going uphill. Oh. On the 10th day, she was told that she would be allowed to see her mother. The nurse came into her room and led her down a long hall. At the end of the corridor was a glass partition. She saw her mother through this window. On sight of her mother, Zettel was met with an explosion of happiness. Although the glass separated them, they were able to embrace each other with their eyes. Next to her mother stood a man she knew was her father, the father she had seen only in an old faded photograph. He was tall and, like herself, had a light complexion and sandy-colored hair. His eyes were a deep blue similar to hers in color and shape. He kept fingering and turning the brown cap that he held in his large, calloused hands. She could see that his clean gray suit was patched and the material frayed. A thin smile suddenly appeared at the corner of his mouth. Soon the smile grew broader and broader. Before long, the three of them were laughing and crying. We will soon all be together, her mother's words rang out. Do not worry, my dear Zettel. On hearing that, Zettel felt a sense of great joy and intense relief, for she knew her mother's words were always to be true. Thank you for listening. And my mother's name is not Zettel. Well, her Yiddish name is Zettel. She is now Celia Carrots. Thank you for listening.
So do you want to share a little what it was like to hear that story as a girl? To share, to grow up with knowing that's your mother's story?
Well, it was nice that she related to me, and she remembered everything, even only being 7. But when she saw her father for the first time after so long a time, she knew it was her father. And she was excited to come to America, and she did get well. And but I'm glad she told me the story. It was nice that she told me the story. And she remembered everything, you know. And it's pretty amazing. She had a lot of memories that she relayed to me. So I'm glad to be able to share that. with my family. So thank you for listening. Sorry about the intrusion, but it was a phone call. I couldn't get it. Thank you. Bye.